I think we can all agree that appearance is a really important thing when we're adolescents. We are very obsessed with how we look, how our peers look, how we should look, what we don't like about ourselves. Appearance is really super important for most adolescents. In fact, in research, when asked what is the thing that you're the most concerned about, adolescents, like way out ahead of any other concern, list their appearance. They're worried about acne, they're worried about their hair, they're worried about their body. For boys versus girls, boys oftentimes have internalized, idealistic, really super hard to achieve without some kind of really crazy diet and supplements and like workout regimes. Boys tend to idealize that, and girls, take the girl version of that, which is an idealized version of what they should look like that would be very hard for the average girl to actually achieve, right? Like it would take a lot. Like I would like to argue, I don't know who this person is in the picture, that maybe she didn't naturally achieve it and that maybe he didn't naturally achieve it, right? Like there may be things that they've done that the adolescent has no idea about. And the adolescent thinks, well, if I just eat right, or if I just exercise, or if I just, control some aspect of my environment, I'll be able to look like these people too. What they don't want to look like is they don't want to be, on the guy's side, it tends to be they don't want to be like perceived as wimpy. And on the girl's side, they don't want to be perceived as fat. So these, the two sexes have sort of different goals, but kind of similar, right? They want to be, on the guy's side, they want to be very perceived as masculine. And on the girl's side, they tend to want to be perceived as feminine. That's how they've internalized these two things. On average, girls on surveys express less satisfaction with their appearance than boys do. On average, girls are more likely to say that they don't like some aspect of how they look, whereas boys are oftentimes, at least on surveys, will give the impression that they're not concerned about their appearance. I don't think it's necessarily true that they don't care about their appearance, but they'll give that impression. This sex difference might be due in part to media influence, right? Like girls oftentimes will express less satisfaction because they're comparing themselves to unattainable goals, right? Like they're looking at other people's social media accounts, or they're looking at, you know, models in magazines, or they're looking at somebody on TV or a movie, and they're thinking, well, I should look like that, not realizing that, when I was growing up in the 70s, I was like in sixth grade in 1978, so it's, a long time ago. Models were very thin, like their hip bones could be seen through the pants they were modeling, kind of thin. And unbeknownst to me as a sixth grader, it turns out that a lot of those models came out later reporting that they used cocaine and other amphetamines to maintain their weight. And I don't mean to be a stick in the mud, but I wasn't really willing to do that. It didn't seem like a healthy lifestyle to me as a kid. So I was like, well, I was kind of glad to find out that they were doing those things, because it kind of otherwise gave the impression that it was achievable for an average person to be able to, look the way that the models were looking, and it wasn't achievable. So speaking of unachievable beauty, I'm going to go ahead and mute this once it starts running, because you don't even need to hear anything that's going on. This Dove has been really good about these kinds of boosting girls. I'm sorry, anybody looking at this girl can see that she's very cute, right? But let's see what social media really has kind of done to her self-esteem. So obviously, they're right. We have been spending too much time on social media, especially through the pandemic. But it was a problem before the pandemic struck, and now there are so many filters that you can put on your pictures to make your eyes look big and your nose look smaller and all these things. Like, you're never good enough. Like, just putting I was just looking at the headshot that I got from, we had a family photo shoot the fall before the pandemic, and I said, hey, maybe you could take a picture of just me by myself to use as a headshot, because I have to put it on like Canvas and Zoom and stuff like that. So he took a picture of me, and I didn't expect him to do anything to it. I expected it to just be, me. And when I got it back, I noticed that I've got a mole on my throat, and it's not on the picture. So that very clearly knows, I now know for sure that he was like trying to fix up my neck for me. Hey, thanks, photographer, but I didn't ask you to do that. Like, it's fine to look like myself in a picture. Like, I don't want you to come to my office hours and be like, huh, when you see me. I want you to look like, I want to look like I look, right? And it's, even when I'm just asking for a headshot that's going to be, the size of a nickel that you guys can even see on the screen if you use a computer, it doesn't need to be fixed up. But he felt like it needed to be fixed up. Too bad you have these signs of aging, old lady. But you know what? I don't care, right? It's fine. This is what I look like. But he felt like it needed to be fixed. And that's, it's kind of that insipid kind of, it just gets into our bloodstream, right? So the media can have this huge influence. When in adolescence, boys tend to express a preference for thin girls. And that can really get inside of girls' heads as they're growing and they're developing, and their bodies are naturally putting fat here to make their hips bigger and there to make their breasts bigger. It also can be putting fat in other places. And boys oftentimes will make jokes. They don't know what they're talking about yet. You got to remember that boys are like developmentally 2 years behind girls, but they're trying to keep up with what the girls are doing and how the girls are. And so they try to say sophisticated things so that they can look like they're not a little boy compared to everybody else. And so then they express things like thin girls are more attractive. And maybe even when they are young and they are thin themselves, because everybody's growing and developing, and so it's easier to stay thin, they may actually feel like a thinner girl is more attractive. But as they age, they'll start to express that actually, in fact, thinness isn't necessarily the most important thing for attractiveness. Men grow and develop, and their attitudes change about female forms. And so, but like I said earlier, our sense of selves tend to develop in adolescence. And so this kind of feedback from your peers that, a thinner girl is more attractive really can have this big influence on girls, feeling like they're attractive or not. I don't think it's a huge surprise that girls are more prone to depression after puberty than they were before puberty. Before puberty, the sexes were equal in how likely they were to express depressive symptoms. After puberty, girls are way more likely to report depressive symptoms. If a person feels attractive in adolescence, when they reach adulthood, they tend to have higher self-esteem. They tend to be happier. I mean, these are things that get laid down when we are very young, 12 to, let's say, 18. And that has lifelong impacts on a person's self-esteem and happiness. I was just talking to my husband the other day. He and I went to the same high school, and we were actually in the same class. So he knows a lot of the same people I know, and he knows a lot of the things that, were said about into girls in our class and stuff like that. And so he said something the other day that was not pejorative or mean. I don't want to cast the story incorrectly, but it kind of was very reminiscent of the kinds of things that adolescent boys used to say when we were adolescents. And he could see on my face that what he said kind of like stabbed me in the heart. And he goes, are you thinking about some other context? Because I did not mean anything wrong. And I'm like, it's hard that to hear you say something that I, in a previous life, heard one of your peers say, and they meant it in a mean way. Like it still is affecting me decades later, stuff that happened in adolescence. And my husband's like, you gotta, drop that stuff. I'm like, nice, that's super helpful. Anybody who knows what I'm talking about, oh yeah, just drop that. Just forget about it. It's not easy to let that stuff go, and it can stab you in your self-esteem even in adulthood, decades later. So I think that stuff is really super important for us to all remember. So some health concerns that we adults have about adolescence. I don't know why this graphic is already showing, so try not to look at my graph. Overall, adolescence is a very healthy time. There's a very low rate of disability among adolescents. There's a very low rate of chronic disease, that needs to be treated frequently in adolescence. Most of the things that go wrong are preventable problems. Smoking, drinking, using marijuana. These are things that oftentimes begin in adolescence and can cause long-term health effects. And, if we just hadn't started them in adolescence. Sexual activity is another preventable problem that can lead to infections. It can lead to pregnancy. What we're seeing that's really a positive thing, and I teach human sexuality, and so this comes up in slightly different contexts, but we talk about how after the onset of HIV and the campaigns to help people to realize that you're the best way to stay safe is to limit your number of partners and to use condoms every time. We have enjoyed a precipitous drop in teenage pregnancy. One of the reasons why is high schoolers are delaying sex later and later. This is broken down by race, and so you'll see the green. And the reason why there's like an area hovering around the green is because that's the range of, if you go from the top of that light green to the bottom of that light green bar, it would include 65% of respondents. So that's what that's illustrating. So it's really kind of give you an idea how variable it is for each of the races. So the red line is the average across all. The red line is all other races combined. And then they broke out specifically, green is Black or African American, blue is Hispanic or Latino, and purple is white. And so what you'll see is that there were wider racial disparities back in 1991 with Blacks and African Americans having had sex by the time, while they were in high school at a rate of about 81% compared to about half of Hispanic or Latinos and whites having had sex in high school. Now that we're down over here at 2019, the races have really converged and have very similar numbers that are right around about 40% of high schoolers report that they have had sex. So that's a really huge improvement, and it's a good idea health-wise, right? Take all the morality or any of those issues out and just talk about what would preserve a person's health longer is to reduce their risk of exposure to potential STIs, and then also to reduce their risk of becoming pregnant or making someone else pregnant, right? Like that, if you can get through high school without either of those things happening to you, your probability of a healthy life is significantly higher. So this is great news that we've got it down to about 40%. Now, it's still 40% are having sex, and so it's still something that we need to talk about. The causes of death among adolescents, according to the CDC, this is data from 2019. So this is of the about 13,000 adolescent age people who died in 2019. And I killed myself trying to find the actual number, like how many adolescents died. And it was really hard. And you'll notice that this graphic isn't purely adolescents. It's age 10 to age 24. So this isn't even just purely adolescents. The CDC doesn't report that. This would actually take us from late childhood or middle childhood through emerging adulthood using these numbers. So this isn't perfect, but it's the best that I could find. So you'll find that unintentional injuries was the most common cause of death for this age group, which means that, if we could get a handle on accidents and stuff like that, that would really reduce death rate in this group. And then you'll see that suicide was the next most common with 19.7%. That's about 2,600 suicides in this age group of 10 to 24. 15.1% of deaths in this age group, that's about not quite 2,000, were homicides. And then the next biggest group was other, like any other cause of death was lumped together, and that's about 1,800 people in this age group. So this age group isn't perfect. It's not purely adolescents, but I wanted to give you hard numbers as far as how many are dying in the different ways, because since about 2010, there's been an increase in the suicide rate among this age group. And it's, you do not want 2,600 kids committing suicide at all, for sure. You don't want that to be happening. But I wanted to put it a little bit into context to show you exactly the raw number. Because when you say that 19.7% of the people who in this age group who died by suicide, that's, your mind goes to a really large number. Larger than 2,600 deaths. That's where my mind went. I was expecting it to be like 10 times that big, like 26,000. But 26,000 people in this age group didn't die. So this age group is very unlikely to die at all. And then I just want to remind you how large our population is. We have 330 million people. Some subset of that would fall in this age group. And so it's a very rare time for a person to die of any cause. And certainly anything that's medically based. I mean, the likelihood of a person at this age group dying of some kind of medical cause is really small. What we have is sort of these avoidable causes, right? And that's what we're really concerned with adolescents. That's why depression and things are really important things to talk about. All right, let's go ahead and let's move on to what the teens are concerned about and so on in our next video.